welcome back to episode 12 of the Invictus Podcast with me, Gareth and Sab. How are you doing, Sab?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm very good, thank you. It's been a week or so since we were, well, 2 weeks, I should say, since we were last chatting. You've had an absolutely incredible experience in Monza for many, many reasons, which we'll talk about. We've had another great weeks of racing here in Invictus as well, so tonight should be another good podcast to talk about.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. Although we do have to start on a very sad note, of course. It is the first time we've been back since before the Belgian Grand Prix, so we do just want to quickly mention how our hearts go out to the friends, the family, and everyone surrounding Antoine Hubert, who unfortunately lost his life in Belgium as part of the F2 feature race, racing for the Arden team. He was a real talent as part of the Renault Junior team, and you could see, especially this week with Jack Aitken's win, who's equally part of the Renault Junior team, that it was a really emotional time for everyone, and it was an awful time to be in the F1 community. So yeah, our thoughts and feelings go out to everyone involved in the crash involving Antoine, and of course our support goes out to Juan Manuel Correa, who's currently in hospital recovering from injuries. So starting on a bit of a sad note, but hopefully we will mark the memory of Antoine moving on and have some incredible racing in his name, as we saw this week in Italy. But as we go on, yes, it is the Invictus Podcast. We're back every Thursday, apart from last week, of course, which we'll get onto later. And we'll go on to like our first point, and straight off the bat, what's happened to F1 since France and Canada? Because we started off the season, we had this really sort of dull start to the season. Yes, you had Mercedes 1-2s, I believe, the first 5 races we had 1-2s, and then you had obviously the controversy in Canada with Seb and Lewis, and then in France, obviously, you had equally the same with it was just a particularly dull race. But ever since then, we've had magnificent racing. What's changed in Formula One?
It's interesting, isn't it? I can remember everybody was knee-jerking to Formula One, wasn't they? Saying, "Oh, Formula One's dead. Formula One's ruined after the French Grand Prix," and how poor it was. And everybody was losing their minds on social media, saying that drastic changes need to be done and this, that, and other. But I think purely down to what we brushed over in previous podcasts, it's the fact that they've been coming to these traditional, fantastic race circuits. The European leg always brings the best, well, in my opinion, the best race circuits on the calendar: Monza, Belgium, Silverstone, even the Red Bull Ring in recent years has brought us some great races. So I think that definitely does help, especially because with France, everybody was moaning with the amount of runoffs and everything, and there was no real challenge there, or nothing to slow the drivers down if they made a mistake. So I think a lot of that has helped. It also has helped, especially with the German Grand Prix. That was just insane with the weather, but it's helped to think that the likes of Max in the Red Bulls managed to get up there and fight amongst the Mercedes, and Charles just recently, which we'll get onto, is picked up his first wins. And yeah, it's definitely helped the fact that we've had different race winners during this European leg. I hope this trend of great races continues. It normally does into Singapore, because we normally have great racing around the streets of Singapore. So yeah, I just think, for me, genuinely, it's down to the race circuits we've been at, and Mercedes just haven't quite been at the races yet. They've been there and thereabouts like they always have, Mercedes, but it's not been a walkaway like we've seen earlier in the season.
Is it the purely on the face that we don't have this Mercedes dominance like we saw early in the season, or is it because we see the likes of, I think Towards the start of the season, I think Charles Leclerc, he was definitely not struggling, but I think he was getting through that sort of opening phase of being part of Ferrari, and you could see the pressure was definitely on him when he was making mistakes, at the likes of Baku, where he put it in the wall just for the castle section. But now he
Yeah.
seems to be kind of coming into his own. He seems to be sort of enjoying his racing. He's a lot more relaxed. Is that helping this championship this season? Because it's allowing us to have these fights with the likes of Max, with the likes of Charles, and the two what we would probably say most likely to go on and sort of dominate the next 5-10 years of Formula One. Is it down to those two, or is it just an accumulation of several things?
I think they are key factors. I also think it's an accumulation of other things as well. The midfield battle hasn't always been straightforward. Recently, McLaren have struggled, and Renault found a bit of form in Italy, and we've had other teams in the midfield as well doing well. Charles, I find it really interesting if we'd have had an even better start of the season. If Charles had managed to pick up that win in Bahrain, which he fully deserved, he dominated all that weekend, and unfortunately he had that engine issue. If he'd have won then, who knows where we'd be right now in the championship? Yeah, we'd probably still have Lewis leading the championship, but I think it might have been a bit closer, and it might have relaxed Charles a bit quicker, and we might have seen him fighting amongst those Mercedes sooner rather than later. But yeah, I think, like I say, it's a accumulation of everything we've had. Not just good racing at the front like we've seen at Monza for the battle for the win, but we've had good racing all the way down the field, and it's captivated the audience a lot, and it's got people really engaged because they know that not one person's running out in a 40-second lead, or this the teams up to fifth place have already been lapped and stuff like that. It's been a lot more closer bunched up. I'm sure in one of the practices at Monza, between like fifth and 18th, there was just barely a second or something like that. So it has got a lot closer, and it's proven that. Let's just hope this trend of close racing, what we have had, carries on into Singapore.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we just said there that Max and Charles are definitely a part of that. And one name we didn't mention is Seb, and obviously it's well documented that he had the incident at the weekend with the spin, another error from him, and equally then picking up a 10-second stop go, so the harshest penalty the stewards can hand out without it being a black flag. But before that, he's been out qualified in I want to say seven Grand Prix in a row by Charles Leclerc, and then equally he's just like he went through a spell of four Grand Prix where he didn't qualify inside the top five, and so I mean I think we've covered Seb before a couple of times on what's happening and is it in his head, is he losing the passion, but what is happening with Seb? Because it's we start the season with Matteo Binotto saying that Seb was the de facto number one, and that Charles would have to toe the line for now, and that yes, Charles is the up and coming, but he's going to have to play second fiddle this season to Seb. But they have to be at Maranello have to be rethinking that now, because Charles is the man that has been taking it to Lewis in the last few races, and of course picked up the last two race victories, which I don't know, race victories in the Maranello team tend to bring you favour. So with Seb becoming sort of the inconsistent driver, is he at risk of losing that status as top driver?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I'm on the side of Seb. I've always liked Seb. I think, yeah, he's had his crazy moments. Who hasn't in Formula One? I think if, for example, Canada had gone his way, which I again think it should have gone his way, then we might have not had what we've had recently from Seb, and we might have had a complete turn in form from Seb, and we might have seen a more confident Seb. You can clearly see his form is in the gutter right now. His confidence is low. He just doesn't seem to get what he wants out of the car. He had that spin at Ascari. It's just, I don't know whether it's a combination of his confidence and the car just doesn't suit him. I don't know. It's going to be tough from now to the end of the season, because Seb, where do you go? You've got a red hot form, uh, so-called number two driver next to him. He can only surely just try and knuckle down, get his head focused on racing and prove that why he's a four-time world champion. The problem, the most frustrating thing I found recently is a lot of people forget he's a four-time world champion. He's this really experienced, very good racing driver, and because he's having a tough year, people are just pretty much writing him off as he's finished or he's not interested or he's retiring. And I think it's a little unfair on him. Everybody in Formula One at some point will go through a sticky patch, and unfortunately for Seb, at this moment, it is that for him. Yeah, for me, it probably all started from the fact that at the beginning of the year, this Ferrari was supposed to be the best car on the grid, and it's just not handled, has it? It's just been poor through corners. It's been all right going down a straight, which it proved in Monza, but apart from that, this Ferrari car has been awful, to be honest. And I personally think it's more favouring the fact that it's just not suited Seb this year. If Seb stays in Formula One, which I imagine he will, and stay with Ferrari, and they build a better car next year, I imagine you will probably get a better Seb next year. But for me, I just think it's a combination of the car just not suiting him, and when your confidence is that low, just things just tend to go that way with you, don't they? When you're down, it always seems to be getting worse, doesn't it? There doesn't seem to be an end in sight. I just think he needs to get to the end of the season and then move on and forget this season. But I'm not sure what your opinions are on his current form and his confidence.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one because you see quite a lot of parallels with past history in Formula One, and we saw in Red Bull when Danny Ricciardo like kind of joined the team after coming up from Toro Rosso, and he started challenging Seb, that Seb kind of lost his bottle, and he didn't like it. He didn't like that he was being challenged for this number one status, and ended up leaving to go to Ferrari. And yes, you can call Red Bull to Ferrari an upgrade, but at the time Red Bull, of course, were the top team. But it's almost like the same thing is happening again, and you've got this young upstart that's joined the team. He's picking up positions, picking up these fantastic pole positions, these race wins now, and it's whether Seb has that real drive to assert his dominance within a team, or whether he's just gonna, I don't know, he's got 51 race victories. He can kind of sit back and say, I've got my world championships. I'm not that bothered about fighting as much as I was when I was part of the Red Bull program. But I don't know. I would like to think that Seb has still got a few good years left in him. I don't want to see the same thing happen to him as what we saw from Fernando a few years ago. And obviously Fernando went to McLaren, and yes, he made the jump in good faith because McLaren was a team that he'd raced for previously and he enjoyed being there, and there was the ideal that the working in Honda would work, and obviously it didn't, and it kind of you just had Fernando languishing around the back end of the grid for the majority of the last 2-3 seasons of his career. I don't want the same to happen to Seb. So if he is going to compete, he needs to switch back on, and he needs to do it before the end of this season, because he did the same last season. After he had that incident in Germany where he went off when it started raining, that was pretty much it for the end of his season. He just completely, almost mentally checked out, and after that, of course, like you had the likes of Kimi picking up wins, and so I do think that it's sort of this like second part of the season is really make or break for Seb, because he's got so many. I think Charles has got all the potential at the moment, and Seb really needs to sort of reinforce to Ferrari that he can still do it, because we know how cutthroat they are, and yes, they'll appreciate Seb for what he's done, but unfortunately for him, he won't have the same sort of stature as the likes of Michael did when he raced for Ferrari, because he's yet to take home a world championship back to Ferrari. So he's not going to have that same sort of, yes, he's got the loyalty of it, he's been there for a while, but he's not going to be in that same sort of legendary status. So he's got to really, he's got to show Ferrari that he can still do it, because otherwise they will just make Charles the number one and slowly phase Seb into that Kimi role that we saw last year.
Yeah, yeah, it would. I agree. It would be a shame if Seb was to go down that road. I can't imagine. He's a very private person off track, isn't he? I can't imagine he'd be the sort of person to just accept any old drive as long as he's in Formula One and just keep going like that. I think if his heart's really not in it, I think he probably would just leave Formula One and retire, and you probably wouldn't hear much really from him again unless he comes and turns up in as a guest for a few races. My fingers are crossed that he can find his form, because a fast Seb and a confident Seb is great to watch, and Formula One needs as much competition at the front of the field as possible. It proved it was a good race. We'll get to in Monza, with Charles having to defend from Lewis and Valtteri. But if it was Seb as well, we could have had an epic four-way battle, and that's what we need in Formula One, isn't it? And I've got my fingers crossed that he can turn a corner eventually, and we can see a fast, confident Seb again. But it just remains to be seen, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's all on him for this next part of the season, and hopefully he can turn his fortunes around and start to take these races back. And I think what he just needs to out qualify. He needs to start by out qualifying Charles, because Charles on a bit of a roll at the moment, and confidence in his camp will be sky high. But we'll get on to obviously what happened in Belgium and Monza in a minute. But one thing that did happen there, and that we've seen since obviously the issue of the stewards in Canada with penalising Seb, that ended up costing him the race win, is a lot more leniency, I'd say, from the stewards. And of course now they've brought or reintroduced the black and white flag, which is used quite often across different series. You see it used several times in the likes of the British Touring Car Championship. And obviously it's driving standards, whether it be track limits or actual driving standards for silly moves like we saw in from Charles Leclerc. Is this an upgrade from what we saw, or would you prefer to see the 3 5 second penalties handed back out?
I prefer this, and my question is to you in a second, and you can answer it in a second. If we had the black and white flag back in Canada, would Seb have still got that penalty? That's my question, because with this leniency, what we've seen in Monza, you had Charles, who people have come to me at work and what have you, and said he was too aggressive. He was too aggressive defending on Lewis, and for me, I don't think he was. Yes, he was aggressive, but too aggressive. No, you need hard, good fighting battles at the front, because what is the point in racing if you can't race close and hard with each other? Yeah, he got a black and white flag for it and told him not to do it again. Basically, a yellow card in football. But that's fine. At least you know then where not to do again, not just slap him with a 5 second penalty straight away, because then that just ruins the race for everybody then, doesn't it? Everybody's suddenly not, who's watching either at the track or on TV, is suddenly not interested, because if Lewis just sticks to the back of that Ferrari, he's won regardless. And that's where I think it could have come in sooner, like Canada, like I've just said, because you'd have had that epic battle to the end of the race. And we also forget as well, Charles also missed the turning, didn't he, later on, and cut that, but nothing was given for that because he was deemed to have not really gained an advantage. So for me, it's loads better that it's more lenient like this, but I think it's come too late. I think they should have implemented this at the beginning of the season, not halfway through when key decisions have already been made in a season, which have potentially cost not just the likes I said, but cost other people throughout the grid potential good scoring points positions. So yeah, I'm glad they've done it, and now hopefully they can stick with this and let the racers just race.
Yeah, I mean, going back to your question, I I still think they would have given Seb the penalty. I was always on the side of I think it was a penalty. I think that he got back on the power on the grass, which is what made the car unstable when he returned back to the circuit. So it was I still think that was a penalty. In regards to Charlotte the weekend, I more inclined to think that one was a penalty and one was a black and white flag. I think that the one where he squeezed Lewis onto the grass onto the run area at the second chicane, I'm happy with that being a black and white flag, because we've already seen the likes of Austria with Max and with Charles that you can squeeze someone offline, and to an extent. And yes, he didn't give Lewis the space, but it wasn't. I think if he had compromised Lewis, if it was say more than half the car off, I would have said yes, that's probably a penalty, because he's not given him any space whatsoever. But even watching it live, I think that I understood the black and white flag. The one I actually thought may have been a penalty was the one that he did a few laps later, where he cut across Lewis into the braking zone at the same chicane. I thought that was dangerous driving. Because of the closing speed of Lewis, obviously in the tow around Curva Grande. I thought that one potentially could have been a penalty, but I think what went in Charles' favour was the fact that you were sitting in the home of Ferrari with a potential win for a Ferrari driver for the first time since 2010. And I think it would have caused absolute outrage, like what we saw in Canada, but times 100 with the crowd, because sitting in the middle of them, they are everything that you hear from the Tifosi, and it was brilliant. But I think if they'd slapped Charles with a 3-second, 5-second penalty for what he did there, all hell would have broken loose come the end of the race. So I think that it went in his favour that they were in Italy, because I think if they were in the likes of Hungary, or if they were somewhere that was completely neutral, I think that Charles probably would have picked up a penalty for one, if not both, of those incidents.
That's fair enough. I've always found it interesting to hear what you think. I just think if we start, my personal opinion is if we start throwing 5-second penalties and all the different types of penalties out like candy, it's just going to ruin the fun of racing. And I totally agree with you. It's the home of Ferrari. I would not have envied you being at Monza if they had have been given a penalty, because it'd have been like a riot. And yeah, I'd been much happier sat on my sofa rather than the stands like you if that would have happened. But just quickly, just glossing over just before we move on, I just want to say I think the Seb penalty. If Stroll was to only get a drive-through, then Seb should have got a drive-through. I think Stroll and Seb both did pretty much the same thing to Gasly and Stroll. I just think it was a bit awkward. From what I could tell on the onboards, they couldn't see the cars coming, so they just had to gamble and pull out. And unfortunately for Seb, he caught Stroll, which then put Stroll in a position to catch Gasly out. So I think they were both very similar incidents, which they should have got both the same penalty. One shouldn't have got a harsher one than the other. And I even read a little interview after the race that Stroll even defended Seb and said, look, he should have got the same penalty as me. It's not really fair that he got a 10-second stop-go penalty for pretty much identical the same thing. So some consistency. Basically, what I'm saying is we just need a bit more consistency with penalties, and I just think we can get there with the racing and make it a bit more fairer. But yeah, overall, I think in terms of decisions on penalties and black and white flags and stuff this weekend, last weekend, sorry, it's been pretty good. So hopefully, may that continue into Singapore.
Yeah, I thought that was. I like the black and white flag. I think it's as long as it's used properly and it's not abused. I don't like the idea that it's seen as a yellow card, because I think that then incentivizes the drivers to make slightly dangerous moves and know that they can possibly get away with it. But if it's used correctly for the likes of track limits, or for slight misdemeanors but not major misdemeanors, then I'm all for it. But going on to the review, and obviously in the break we've had two races. We've had the Belgian Grand Prix and the Italian Grand Prix. We'll go over the Belgian Grand Prix a little bit quicker than the Italian, obviously because the Italian is fresh in the memory of us all. But the Belgian Grand Prix won, of course, by Charles Leclerc, first victory, a very emotional win for him, obviously after the tragic passing of his friend Antoine Hubert the day before. But it was a really mature drive from him.
Yes, it was. He thoroughly deserved it in the end, didn't he? Like I say, for the memory of his good friend, he drove really well, and I think, like I say, he thoroughly deserved that race victory. It was well overdue. Like I said earlier, he should have won in Bahrain. He just drove a superb race, very mature. I imagine it would have been very difficult under the circumstances of what happened on Saturday. The race itself, I'd just like to say, I thought it was a superb race to honour Antoine. I think they went out there to do what they do best, race well and race good and give us a good race for the fans, and they certainly did that, and I tip my hat to them. They went out there and did the business, because I think that's what Antoine would have wanted, wouldn't he? He would have wanted good racing and a good show for the fans, and boy, did F1 manage to bring it in Belgium.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it was Charles that won the race ahead of the two Mercedes, with Lewis just unable to catch Charles and finishing just under a second behind. And what was a fascinating end to the race, and really enjoyed that one. Alex Albon, of course, best result for him, 5th position. He made use of course, he was charging from the back, and so it was a fantastic end to the race for him. Started after taking that engine penalty. Although teammate Max Verstappen, silly move into turn 1, which is something we haven't seen from Max for a few races, and he had a really poor start, threw it down the inside where there wasn't going to be enough room for him to get the move done. And I've seen plenty of Dutch fans on social media and chatting to us as part of our social groups that said, oh, well, Kimi closed in on him. But if you look back at the photos and the pictures, there was no way that he was going to get a car that long and that wide around the apex at that tight that would have got him back out onto the straight at a relatively decent speed. So bit silly from Max, broke the steering arm and ended up in the barriers at the top of Radion.
Yeah, it was a bit like Max of 2 years ago, wasn't it? Max has been superb this year, and he just looked like he was gonna just carry on with this momentum. And unfortunately, it was just I just think it was just an error which it just caught him out, and I don't think it will affect his racing for the rest of the season. I just think it was a one-off, especially this year, because the amount of mistakes he used to make compared to what he's done this year is so much more improvement. So yeah, that allowed for me as well to be very happy. A nice little door for Lando to open up, which don't really want to talk about what happened to Lando.
Well,
we all know what
I was
happened
just
to
going to
Lando.
start saying I don't want you to start getting any sort of PTSD from hearing the sounds. It's broken. It's broken.
Yeah, please don't.
Obviously, a massive McLaren fan you are, and I was absolutely gutted. Like we've discussed before, I do have a very soft spot for McLaren. Always grew up loving watching them. So, and sort of. It was heartbreaking to see Lando break down with one lap left to go, and because that was something he really deserved, because we knew that the McLaren wasn't the setup right for Spa and for Monza. It's not, they aren't tracks that suit them, but he drove on his own for the entirety of the race, didn't put a foot wrong, and that just shows how cruel sport can be sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I'd just like to say how mature and brilliant Lando was after the race. He could have easily thrown all his toys at his pram, blamed Renault and the engine, blamed McLaren, done this and other. Remember, he's only 19. He could have really had a good old hissy fit about it, but he just pretty much shrugged it off and said that that's racing, and you've just got to take it on the chin, so to speak. And he was very, very mature because he took it a lot more maturely than I did. I'll tell you that, because there was a lot of swear words coming out of my mouth for a good half an hour after that. But it just shows what type of talented driver McLaren have on the books this year with Lando. It's a shame because it's not I know he wasn't in fifth in previous years, but it's not the first time he's been in good point scoring positions, and he's lost out because of technical problems on the car. The same happened in France. He was running sixth with uh, Carlos just ahead of him, and they were looking like strong points, and he ended up dropping right down because he had an issue there in France. So it must be frustrating for Lando, but he's just got to take this year as a good learning year and work on it for next year. But you can't take anything away from Lando when technical issues like that ruin your race.
No, it was unfortunate, and his position in the driver standings doesn't really reflect what we've seen so far this season from him, because he has had so much misfortune with issues with the car. But obviously it was a good points position for Perez, finishing in sixth, making up for the incident with Lando. So he then had Daniel Kvyat, Hulkenberg, Pierre Gasly, and another emotional, obviously best friends with Antoine Hubert, and picking up points for Toro Rosso. So double points finish for Toro Rosso, which actually moved them at the time above Renault. And then Lance Stroll making it double points for Racing Point in 10th, and just knocking Lando outside of the points. And yeah, it was a disappointing race, and we'll get on to the Italian Grand Prix now. But it was a disappointing race for McLaren in Belgium as well, with Carlos Sainz retiring earlier in that one as well.
Yeah, it's been a tough second half to the season for McLaren. Just briefly glossing over what happened in Monza. Unfortunately, it was just a human error on the pit stop. They didn't get the wheel tightened up correctly, and off he went. And as soon as he pulled out of on Carlos Sainz, I should say, as soon as he pulled out of the pit lane, you could see the wheel was nowhere near attached. It was pretty much hanging on already before he just left the pit lane. So that was really unfortunate, because Carlos was having a superb race himself in sixth. He had a good battle with Alex Albon early on, which was really interesting to see, and he did well against Lando. He drove an okay race. He started at 16th or 17th, didn't he, and managed to just pick up a solitary point 10th. But I think, like you've pointed out, this was a Grand Prix. These were two Grand Prix that never really suit the car. McLaren they've admitted themselves, don't really have a good low downforce setup for this year's car. So they'll be glad to see the back of these two races, and they'll be hoping for stronger for the next few races. But Monza itself, like we've just spoke about, I thought it was a superb race. I don't know, you'll be able to tell us shortly how it was for you trackside. I thought what about qualifying? We've completely missed that. Qualifying was just insane. Never seen anything like it in all the time I've watched Formula One. You've watched it more longer than I have. That was just nuts. Carlos Sainz being the only guy who managed to get across the line at the end. They were just silly games, weren't they? Just get on with it, and it allowed Ferrari to keep hold of the pole position for Charles. And once again, like he did in Belgium, he was superb out in front against two angry Mercedes cars trying their best to get past him.
Yeah, I thought it was obviously I was there Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it was incredible. It was everything you'd think the Italian Grand Prix would be. The atmosphere was fantastic. The people there were wonderful. If you've never been to the Italian Grand Prix, I can recommend it by huge amounts. It was absolute value for money. But yeah, qualifying really was absolutely mad. It was fantastically mad. But I don't think the fans and the Tifosi didn't seem to mind that much because the Ferrari was on pole. So everyone kind of just laughed it off. So it wasn't. I don't think it got the reaction that. I think it irritated the TV fans a lot more than what we saw on track, because where I was sitting, I in Tribuna Piscina 5, which is just on the exit of the pit lane, and it was the stands just erupted into laughter because it was so obscure and ridiculous to watch, and you saw them coming out of the pit lane, and you thought, God, because my partner, she'd said to me, she's like, they're leaving it very, very late, and obviously they all came out exactly the same time. They all wanted the toe. Nico Hulkenberg straight lines the chicane, trying to hope that everyone goes ahead and that he can pick up a mega toe off the rest of them. They all then decide to back off, let him take the lead, and it was just the entire way round was crazy. And it really if you haven't seen it, I would go back and watch what happened in F3 qualifying the day before, and they had exactly the same thing, except for in the F3 grid there's 30 of them. So imagine going down the back straight and there was about 15, maybe 20 cars doing exactly the same thing. So you had 15, 20 cars all trying to slow down, so they were getting to almost at a standstill coming up to the Parabolica. But you had several others on their fast laps, so they were coming up towards the Parabolica at full speed with cars pretty much stationary, and that's almost what you had at Formula One. And I thought they would have been, because F3 ended up having their qualifying cancelled with, I think it was 4 minutes left to go, and all got taken up to the steward's office and given them a slap on the wrist, and in fact some of them were even given 10-place grid penalties. And I'm very surprised, because there was talk about getting grid penalties for what they did in Formula One, that there wasn't. And I think that was a little bit inconsistent from the stewards, because you could have potentially have. I think there was a fantastic story going around that it could have been Antonio Giovinazzi sitting on the pole position if everyone that was involved got a penalty, and you would have had potentially I think it was an Alfa on the pole with a Toro Rosso and then a Williams. And yeah, it was. I don't know. I think this is gonna bring changes to qualifying. I know that Ross Brawn. I watched an interview with him the other day, and he said that he's quite eager to bring changes, especially to qualifying. So I think from next season, maybe 2021. If they can't get it for next season, I think we're going to go back to the Super Pole up, and we'll have cars going out there and getting one lap to do that fastest lap, and perhaps doing it like how Indy do, where the top guy in the championship goes last. So obviously they have the most rubbered in track, which does give them the advantage. But then again, that gives you the incentive to do better in the races. But I think that's probably where we're going to end up going.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it? My only argument with Superpole is if you've got mixed conditions, you're going to end up having drivers complaining. So if you had, say, the first three guys going out there and it's completely bone dry, and then you get Lewis, the last guy, going out and it's wet or damp, he's not going to get the pole position, and you're going to end. That's my only issue. Is you're going to end up having drivers complaining that they're not getting a fair chance at potential pole position. But on the flip side of that is it would mix up the grid, and you would probably get better racing, because then if, for example, you got a Giovinazzi on pole position because he was out there first and then the track went damp, then you suddenly have a crazy looking start to the race, which can only make it enjoyable for us. So it's two ways to go on with the Super Bowl. I'm a bit meh about it, I'll be honest. If it does come in, then yeah. If not, I'm not going to be calling for it, really. I think the problem was we don't want a knee-jerk reaction just because of what happened in Monza, because Monza's just a unique track in itself, isn't it? We're not going to be getting people going out with 1:30 left in Singapore all at once just because they're trying to get a toe, because it just won't work around there. So I just think because of the conditions of Monza, I think people are just panicking a bit that qualifying's a bit iffy, but I think it'll be back to normal in Singapore.
Yeah, I do agree, but I do look at, and I'm a massive fan of the junior formula. I love watching F3 and F2, and And obviously they do the feature race on a Saturday and a sprint race on a Sunday, and the top 8 of the feature race get reversed, so you end up having a reverse grid on the Sunday. And
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. It makes it almost two separate racing, because you have the race for the win on the Saturday, but then equally you have a fantastic battle because people want to finish in 8th. If you're like in 10th, you really want to get 8th, because you know that if you finish in 9th, you're going to start in 9th. If you finish in 8th, you're going to start on the pole. So I think there's definitely ways of kind of changing qualifying or changing how we race that will bring excitement. And yes, it might change the whole dynamic of how we race and where we race and how we race. But I think things like that potentially might make things a little bit more exciting, and I would like to see a completely mixed up grid. And I think a super pole, like you say, if you have the Williams going out on a dry track, and then by the end you've got the Mercedes going out on a wet track, fantastic. I want that. That would be brilliant, and not because it would put the Williams on pole, but it would. You then get a situation in the race where you get to see who can you get. We saw at the weekend. Well, we didn't see. It's one of the thing is that with Checo Perez keeping Max Verstappen behind for the last 6-7 laps of the race, and it was fantastic. If you watched it back on F1's
Yeah,
YouTube channel, it's
I've seen that.
brilliant, and that's what you want. You want the slower cars in front having to really work hard, and the drivers having to impress. And what it can only do is highlight these drivers potentially to then move up to the bigger teams, because you want to see what they can do up against guys that have got much bigger, better machinery than them. So I think mixing up the grid is a really good way of doing that. And yeah, if that means by doing a Super Bowl idea where you can, or something along the lines, it doesn't have to be Super Bowl, or something where it can potentially make these grids a little bit more Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, Renault, McLaren, the likes. Because you can almost, before a weekend starts, depending on the track, you can almost predict the top 6, now 7, possibly even 8, 9 positions that will be that we'll see taken up by the cars. So I think qualifying would it could do with a little bit of a. I didn't like the time or the elimination idea they came up with a few seasons ago. I don't think that worked, because you did get just cars not being out on track. I didn't think that was properly thought through. But I do think some sort of one lap for glory might make it just a little bit more just a little bit more interesting, because you never know who can make a mistake or who can really nail that one lap pace.
Yeah, you make good points there. It's will be interesting to see where they go from there. Do we move on? Shall we think? Or what do you think? Do we move on from what we've just been discussing? We've got several other key points to talk about. We're 45 minutes into this discussion, so it's easy to get lost in these discussions, isn't it? While we're on it, I'll move us on if that's okay. We've got Singapore up next. It's a particular favourite of mine, the night race, the original night race of Formula One, the streets of Singapore. They dub it the hardest race for F1 drivers just because of the humidity and how long the race is. How do you think that'll go, and what teams do you think will be benefited from this street circuit of Singapore, which is pretty much a complete opposite of where we've just been racing in Monza?
Yeah, well, I think we see the likes of Ferrari really excel at the power circuits like Belgium and Monza, and therefore you saw Charles picking up the win in Italy, and but I think this is Max Verstappen's territory. I think we come over to a street circuit, which we know the Red Bulls have famously been good at for the last few seasons. Obviously, you had Danny Ricciardo picking up the win in Monaco last year. You've had the Red Bulls go quite well at Singapore over the last few years. So this is sort of where Max needs to just get a footing back on the podium. He's had a few races where obviously had the issue at the start of last weekend where he collided into the back of Perez, had the issue at the start of the Belgian Grand Prix. So I would expect to see the Red Bulls possibly out qualifying the Ferraris. I think the Ferraris, we know in slower circuits, don't tend to do too well. I would expect to see McLaren come back from what's been two, as you said, not great start to the second half of the season for them. No points, no points for them in Spa, and then only 1 point in Monza. So their lead in the constructors now dropped down. So yeah, the McLarens I'd expect to do well, because obviously I think after the Renaults, obviously fourth and fifth for them, which was mega for them in the Constructors' Championship, need to kind of re-engage that sort of lead they've got over the Renaults and the Toro Rosso. So yeah, Red Bull and McLaren, I think the top two possibly. I think we might see the Toro Rossos do quite well, because Toro Rosso have often has they just, as long as the problem with Toro Rosso recently is they just seem to have quite a lot of issues with the power unit, because obviously we saw Danny Kvyat his shutdown last weekend. The weekend before, I believe it was Gasly's that shut down. So yeah, Toro Rosso possibly are looking at picking up some more points.
Yeah, they've been pretty consistent when it comes to these sort of tracks, haven't they, Toro? So it's that midfield battle is going to be extremely interesting, isn't it? Because like you say, I expect McLaren to go a lot better in Singapore. But then again, the problem is with the likes of Singapore is you just never know what race you're going to get if you get caught up in traffic, or if you run wide, or if the conditions rain or anything comes down. You just don't know what type of race you're going to get at Singapore, do you? And anything's really possible. Like you say, I fully expect Max to be right up there. That's probably why as well they went for that engine penalty on him to make sure he's set for Singapore to fully attack the track. And then you've got likes of Japan after, which Honda definitely won't want to be taking engine penalties at their home race. So yeah, Singapore's it's gonna be good. I can't imagine Ferrari will be going for race wins there, unfortunately for them. I think it'll probably be between Mercedes and Red Bull for the potential race win.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think obviously you can never discount Mercedes. They seem to have it locked in for these sort of street circuits as well, and have always done very well. So never count out the Mercedes. But is we kind of look over the entirety of the grid, is there any team that kind of really needs to switch on over this next few races? Because I think the likes of Renault have had a dreadful season compared to what we thought they would. And obviously brought in Daniel Ricciardo at the start of the season. They've got Nico leaving with Esteban coming in for 2020. I think they're a team that really need to start picking up some decent results. And the fourth and fifth this weekend has kind of masked over what has been a really difficult season for them.
Yeah, it has. And for me, Renault, if you look back at the Canadian Grand Prix, which is it's quite similar to Monza, isn't it? They went well there in Canada. They got a sixth and seventh that day. So it looks like the Renault is a lot more suited to the lower downforce package and the longer straights, the quicker top end races. So as you've seen at the Monza, that really skinny wing they had on the rear of that Renault proved how much speed they wanted to try and go for in Monza. I think it'd be a bigger, tougher ask for them in Singapore, because when downforce is required, they do seem to struggle quite a bit. So I'm not expecting them to be. I've probably jinx myself saying this, but I'm not expecting them to be fighting fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh. They may get one or possibly two cars into the top 10, but I think it's going to be a lot harder for them this time round with the likes of McLaren, as you say, Toro Rosso, maybe even Racing Point as well might even sneak in there. Lance Stroll or Perez could go well there, so it's going to be a lot trickier for Renault. But like you say, this fourth and fifth, what they did pick up, it's kind of a weird blip, isn't it, in a bad season for them. And if they can, for their sake, if they can push on, for the rest of the season, and using this as a catalyst to try and push for the fourth in the championship, then that'd be great for them. But I just honestly don't think they've got the car to be able to do that for the rest of the season now.
Well, we'll find out, and of course it's 2 weeks until or week and a half until the Singaporean Grand Prix. We will be discussing the build-up next week and next week's podcast. So yeah, tune in for that one. But for the final portion of the podcast, of course, we will just quickly run over, and we are, if you are new to us, are a online racing league for PS4, and we race on F1 2019 and GT Sport. But we had the round 7 of the F1 2019 league, the first league on F1 2019 this week, and it was in Australia, obviously Albert Park in Melbourne. And on Monday night we had the no assist championship, so all guys using no assists. You can use the racing line. If you do not use the racing line, you do get 4 extra points per position. So there's your incentive for running completely no assists. So it was White Fountain, the Belgian, that took his 3rd race win of the season. Fantastic win for him, ahead of Sam Pepito and Speed Queen. Speed Queen back up onto the podium.
Yeah, it's really good to see Speed Queen doing what we all know she can do best, is fighting at the very front of the lead of race. But White Fountain, superb pole position from him, wasn't it? And he never put a foot wrong at the front of the grid, while others behind made mistakes trying to catch him up. He was never phased and drove a superb race to the flag and took a deserved victory. But yeah, mentioning Speed Queen, it's really good to see her back fight at the front again. I hope this now is a good confidence boost for her for the rest of the season. We see Speed Queen do what we all know she can do, and fight for podiums and wins.
Absolutely great to see her back up there. But one person that has been having a slightly off season is reigning champion Scott, retired once again. He's sort of languishing a few places off the top of the driver's standings after Sam Pepito took the lead, with Schofield unfortunately missing the race due to making his way back from Monza. Scott not seemingly in the groove like we saw at the end of last season.
No, he was in top form, wasn't he? The second half of last season, he was the man to beat, and nobody could beat him. This season, I don't know if he's got other things going on outside of racing in Invictus, but he just not quite happening, is it, for him at the moment? I hope we do get to see him back on top form, and we see a good championship fight from now to the end of the season, because it will only benefit the likes of us commentating and everybody else watching to have a great race. He has struggled. I hope that he can pick up and find his form in China next week. It's a shame, isn't it, for him?
Yeah, it really is, and we do hope that Scott kind of gets back to winning ways, and obviously only picked up 1 race victory so far this season. And yeah, as you say, it is us in the commentary booth for that one, Monday nights 8 p.m. here on this YouTube channel. In fact, you can click on the subscribe button that's just to your top left, and if you click on that bell notification, you'll get notified every time we go live. We're now streaming directly to YouTube, moved over from Twitch to YouTube, so you can click subscribe and you'll find out when we go live on here 8 p.m. every Monday evening. On to Tuesday nights, and that's the Realistic Performance League. So cars get allocated week to week depending on your position, both from the last week's race and in the Drivers' Championship. And it was Ferocious Dan in the Racing Point that took the race victory ahead of Simon, the Swede coming in second place in the Alfa Romeo, with Ton Albanak in the Toro Rosso in 3rd position. Good race for Ferocious Dan, used the reverse strategy to pretty much perfect effect.
Yeah, he did. I'd been practicing with Dan Tuesday, and I knew that's the strategy he was going for. He didn't really fancy those soft tyres. They can go off pretty quickly in Australia. He qualified just ahead of me. I think it was P11 he qualified, and he didn't put a foot wrong at all. He took advantage of some mistakes ahead of him, and took a very deserved win in Australia. I don't think he'll be in the Racing Point next week. That's for sure. He drove superbly Tuesday night. He's looking good in Performance League, and we'll be getting on to F3 in a minute. He's also looking good in there. So it's been a good season for Dan so far.
Yeah, man on form at the moment in not just in F3 but in Invictus entirety. So, yeah, good result from Dan. I'm sure he'll be delighted with that one. Simon went from second to second, so pretty consistent from the Swede there. And Ton Albanak will be pretty happy going from fifth up to third and managing to take some points back off Skyzy as Skyzy looks to make it a third Performance League championship in a row. So Skyzy the man to beat. He came in fifth in the Williams. Moving on over to Wednesday nights, and it's the Equal Performance League. So we have 3 races on a Wednesday night: F1, F2, and F3. And we start off with F1, and it was won by Sam Pito. So Sam, after coming in second position on Monday nights with no assists, managed to pick up the race victory on the Wednesday, so an upgrade for him. M. Doran, the Irishman, came in second position with White Fountain this time coming in third. So White Fountain making it a first and a third of the week, Sam making it first and a second. So a good result all around for the no assist guys.
Yeah, it is. If you can get 2 podiums in a week, you're not going to complain about that, are you? Really, White Fountain and Sam showing good form this week, and they'll be hoping to take it into next week for racing in no assist and Equal League in China.
Yeah, absolutely, and of course Andorran a no assist driver as well. So the guys really doing themselves a good service on the Wednesday night part of F1. Of course, you can watch F1 here on Wednesday nights on this channel, and that is Tim in the commentary box, 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights. And just to go back to Tuesday nights, it's Malc and Tim in the commentary box. So Malc and Tim on Tuesdays, Tim on a Wednesday for F1. F2 is with Energy Dan, and that saw last night the Warrislander picking up his third race victory, and a fantastic result for the Dutchman. He absolutely blitzed away once again. He's a man on fire at the moment. No one can get anywhere near him, and he took the win ahead of Esti Mats and Meg Lugby. Meg, in his 100th race for Invictus, picking up a podium, was slightly disappointed and frustrated at the end of the race that he could have done a little bit better, but picking up a podium on the 100th race. And apart from that, it was a pretty standard race. Nothing particularly outstanding. It was we saw a few incidents on the first lap with a few spins from MJ Coupe, and I believe Nick L.J. Thompson retired very early on in the race as well, so did Colin J. So yeah, it was all about consistency in Australia for the F2 drivers, and yep, Warrislander puts himself to the top of the standings, and it's all about trying to catch him, and it's him and Meg, it looks like, for the rest of the season. So F2 looking exciting. F3, and of course was yourself running in it, and it was a successful week for yourself.
Yes, finally. It was an interesting race, F3. We had I can never say his name correctly, I apologise. Synchronously, he got pole position, took a superb pole on the soft tyres. He did look good throughout qualifying, but unfortunately, him and second place Nice Niels had a few incidents which dropped him down the field. Ferocious Dan had an off day for him, unlike on Tuesday night. He unfortunately lost the car at the dreaded turn 12 and picked up a DNF for himself. So that was points lost for him and the championship stakes. But it was Craig from last on the grid. He took the win. He drove superbly. I myself had a good battle with him halfway through the race. He drove hard and fair, and there was no incidents. And Stephen, who I'd say is probably arguably the most informed guy in F3 at the minute, he picked up another podium. Stephen in his Ferrari come home in second place with myself. I could sit here all night and describe how my race went, but I'll just say it was a nice third place, and I'd be happy to get back on on podium, in third place. And yeah, it was interesting because Craig, Stephen, and myself, we all started further down the grid and all ended up on the podium, whereas the more championship running guys like Ferocious Dan and even Mike, who had an off day for himself, finishing in ninth, all struggled. So it just proves that F3 once again that anybody really can win it on their day.
Yeah, absolutely. Craig, of course, the site director for Invictus, and then picked up his fifth race win in the entirety of racing here in Invictus. So 8 seasons entirety. So plenty of races under his belt, 5 victories, and yeah, I'm sure that one felt good for him. So that was the equal performance, and that is Malc commentating on F3 Wednesday nights 8 p.m. here on the YouTube channel. And yeah, so it was a pretty good race all around. It's China up next, round 8 for the guys, and China, a track that I tend to enjoy going around. I won last season as part of my championship season in F3. Is it a circuit that you enjoy racing around?
No, no. When we discussed the tracks, I just don't like China at all. It's just a long straight with a bit of wiggly bit in the middle, and that is it. I just find it completely boring. I'll be honest. I do all right around China. I do much better around China than I do in Australia, but I've just never really enjoyed it. I find it grotesquely boring, to be honest, and hoping that it's going to be a boring race and I do well next week, then I'll be singing its praises. But for now, I just don't enjoy it.
Exactly, that's what you want. You want a boring race where you take the victory. So
Exactly.
that's not a problem with that one. So yeah, make sure you tune in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on the YouTube channel for F1 2019. No assists with Sab and I. Realistic performance with Tim and Malc, and then Tim, Energy Dan, and Malc on F1, F2, and F3 on a Wednesday night. And of course, we do GT Sport. GT Sport underway at the moment. Unfortunately, no stream tonight due to the fact that the commentator is unfortunately unable to make it. But they do race DTM on a 8 p.m. and on a Sunday night LMP1 WEC style league, and that's equally at 8 p.m. on a Sunday night. So yeah, plenty of racing throughout the week here in Invictus, and you can find it all here on YouTube. And we come to the end, and we come to Sab's favourite part of the podcast, as usual, and it's the hot lap question. And I give Sab a question. He gets 1 minute to give me the answer and give his reason for his answer, and we'll all decide whether he's right or wrong. And this week, it's a hypothetical question for yourself, and I'm going to give you 6 drivers. And they're all the youngest guys in F1 at the moment. So you've got Antonio Giovinazzi, you've got George Russell, you've got Lando Norris, of course you've got Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and you've got Alex Albon. You put them in exactly the same car, with exactly the same spec, exactly the same setup. Who is your podium, and what positions are they coming in?
Oh, that's good. I would go with Max first. I'll probably. This is tough because George Russell was superb in F2 last year. This has put me on the spot this week. Max first, Lando second, George Russell third.
Oh, that sounds like that's a little bit of favouritism there. He's not even put Charles Leclerc in his top 3.
Oh, I might get lynched for that, but I just honestly didn't know what to pick for it. There was a bit of favouritism there. I'm not gonna lie, but that is the hardest question you've asked me so far. I could have sat there for an hour thinking that.
Well, I'll have to ramp them up over the next few weeks, and I'm sure they're even harder than that. But that's us done for this week, guys. Round 12, episode 12 is done and in the books, as we say. And we will be back next Thursday for episode 13, where we'll be discussing the build-up to the Singapore Grand Prix and any of the other chaos that's gone on inside F1. We haven't even talked about Rich Energy and Haas's unfortunate breakup, and the fact that we're not going to see any of those wonderful tweets coming out for Williams' story anymore. So we will try and get as much done as we can over the weekend. We will be back with you next Thursday. And of course, you can find us on Twitter at Alan Sabatino for Sab, at GT2_driving for myself. I will hopefully be creating a blog of my time at the Italian Grand Prix, where I will give you all of the lowdown about what to do, where to stay, what to do on the days. So that will be coming hopefully within the next week or so. So make sure you check out my blog, The Understeer, on WordPress, and equally it will go up on our website invictusracingleague.com, which you can go to and find out all the info you need about the GT Sport League, about the F1 2019 League, and of course we've got a FIFA 20 League starting very shortly as well. As soon as the game is released, we'll be setting up the FIFA 20 League, so if you want to get yourself on the pitch, not just on the grid, you can go to the website and find out more details about that. And of course, go to the Apply to Race section if you want to get yourself on the grid for F1 2019 or GT Sport. But that is us done, and we will be back next week. Have a great week. We will see you very soon, and have a good one. See you later, guys.